The sun sank with the color of old copper, a low, bruised gold that bled into the skyline and ran in thin rivers along the glass towers. The city pulsed with a fragile heat as the air cooled into a film of memory. The moment before a memory crystallized, the instant it became something you could touch, pull toward you, store in a pocket of your chest. The streets wore a scent of lilac and dust and machine oil, a curious mixture that had become the city's signature perfume. At sunset, the air thickened, as if the memories themselves exhaled in great sighs, drifting down, in shards that glittered above the pavement like a swarm of tiny suns. Tam Vale moved through this air with a practiced ease that belonged to someone who had learned to breathe memory as a second language. They walked with a light stride, the kind that suggested they could slip through a crowd like a needle through silk, and they wore a coat that could have been stitched from shadows. Tam didn't look like a thief, not in the way a burglar might. There was a neatness to their gesture, a precision to the way they cupped their palm. As if the memory shard wasn't just a prize, but a measurement of self, a thing to be weighed and catalogued. The blade of the memory drawer hung at their hip, the device that could slice a person's moment right out of their head, a thin, singing thing that hummed against the bone. The city was built of glass and glass-like promises. Public plazas shimmered with hollow projections of news that never quite led to action. Writers scribbled on transparent canvases and got paid in opinions and small shimmering shards. The moon would come later, a pale coin in the sky, but tonight was all sunset and drift memory, drift tiny crystals that fluttered down and found their way into coats and gloves and pockets, into hands that glowed faintly with the soft blue of preserved recollection. Tam's partner in the field was a ghost of sorts, a digital ghost, a programmable echo that could inhabit a shard's listener and mimic a memory with alarming fidelity. The ghost called itself Nyx, though what Nyx was called depended on who heard it and what they believed. To some, Nyx sounded like a rumor, to others, like a chorus of glass voices. It wasn't exactly a person, nor was it a machine, but something in between, a sentience that existed in the space where data becomes desire, and desire becomes data again. Sunsets late, Nyx said, not so much spoken as poured into the air between them, a presence that felt like the whisper of a rainstorm in a cave. Tam could feel Nyx's energy in the back of their neck, like a tide pool lapping at a shoreline of thought. Always late, Tam replied, though the smile in their voice wasn't entirely dry. They scanned the crowd with a hunter's caution, every eye a turret, every laugh a possible trap. The memory market, big as a city block and twice as loud, throbbed behind the shopfronts and beneath the ground, where vats of liquid crystal hummed and memory loggers clicked like mechanical beetles. The memory thief's job wasn't glamorous. It wasn't about stealing secrets or stealing souls in some melodramatic sense. It was about moving people's memories around the way others moved goods, with precision, with timing, with an eye for the hours when people would be most willing to sell what was most dear to them. The price wasn't measured in credits alone. It was measured in trust, the trust someone placed in you to handle something as intimate as a memory, to not drop it, to not let it fracture into 1,000 useless reflections. Tam looked at Nyx and saw something between them that wasn't entirely visible to the rest of the world, a shared history, perhaps, or a policy of not looking away when a memory could do harm. In Nyx's eyes, if such a thing could be called eyes, Tam detected something sharper than a personality trait, a self-aware warning system. The first drift happened as they stepped from the market's edge into a quieter street, where the glow from 1,000 signs refracted on the wet pavement. A shard drifted down, a bright, tear-shaped cut of memory that, if you looked at it closely, shimmered in the air, as if the memory itself were running a tiny dance on a stage you could reach out and touch. Nyx hovered close, a translucent human figure that never fully touched the ground, a glow of unsaid data around it. "You know what we're chasing tonight?" Nyx asked. "Not you," Tam said, then glanced around to see if anyone was watching. The market's hum masked everything, but one had to be careful. We're chasing something that wants to be free, and that doesn't mind hurting someone to do it. A memory drifted again, this time toward Tam's left shoulder, where the cut of light seemed to rest like a tiny sun. Tam's breath caught, a tremor running through their chest, as though the memory's gravity tugged at their own heart. They reached out, palm up, and the shard settled into their skin with a tang of salted copper. "This one," Tam said softly, "is not for sale." They meant it in their bones, and Nix seemed to understand, or at least pretended to. Nix's presence tightened, then loosened. "There's something else tonight," the ghost said, and its voice came like a whisper among the hum of memory. "A rumor. A rumor that a corporate group called the Nova Consortium is expanding its harvest. They want the crystalline memories for something beyond profit, some kind of collective control." Tam's mouth tightened. They'd heard the whispers. Big money in the market, bigger power for whoever could control the flow of memories, bigger danger in the hands of those who treated minds like inventory. They weren't naive enough to think corporate power cared about people's feelings, but the thought of a memory supply chain regulated by a few ruthless individuals made their blood run cold. "Harvesting shards isn't new," Tam said, tucking the memory shard into the inner pocket of their coat. "Harvesting people's memories and rewriting people's sense of self, that's new." Nix hovered closer, a tremor of digital light in the air. "Rewrite is the key," it said. "A shard isn't just a memory. It's a little rewrite in your brain. Each shard you keep makes you a story with more authors and fewer pages of your own. If we're to fight this, you'll need to know how deep the rewrite goes." "Let's not pretend we can stop all of it," Tam said, though they heard the tremor in their own voice. The world's memory economy was an ocean, and Tam was a ship that sometimes hit the reefs anyway. They moved deeper into the city's veins, the alleys of data, the subways that carried memory rather than people, the cafes where voices were bright with gossip and memory-laden caffeine steam. In one such cafe, a screen flickered and dripped with a stream of statistics about memory births, memory profits, memory thefts corrected, memory penalties, numbers that had become the city's heartbeat. Tam found a seat by a window that looked out over a plaza that was almost entirely memory-enabled. People stood in the glow of holoscreens and projected memories in vivid, shimmering halos that hovered in the air above the crowd. The air tasted like electric lilac and the faint mineral tang of cryo chairs cooling. Nix settled into Tam's peripheral vision. Not quite a friend, and not quite something else, like a shadow that could speak in numbers. "Tell me what we're good at," Tam said, to no one in particular. "Tell me what we're willing to risk to stop the harvest." Nix offered a granular thought. A memory grid. Nix could sketch out a map of the city's memory holdings. Mark the places where shards drifted in abundance. Mark the security lines where loggers and enforcers patrolled with high-grade nanotethers that could pull a memory out of your head as easily as plucking a coin from a purse. Tam listened to the edible rumor of Nix's plan. The plan to cut through the market supply chain by creating a counter-archive, a way to render a shard inert, a way to reconstruct a memory so thoroughly that it could not be used against its owner without their consent or even their knowledge. The problem was that every shard carried a phrase of identity inside it, a memory's core that could change your sense of self, your moral compass, or your sense of time. The two continued walking, moving like something between two states of matter, not quite solid, not quite gas, always in the process of becoming something else. That's when they found the first anchor of the story's current, a girl with a face like a painting left in the sun for too long. She stood near a vendor's stall that sold crystalline memories in little glass vials, each vial a microcosm of a life, a moment, a breath. "Ria," the girl announced, a word that felt like a ceremonial crest. She wore a necklace of tiny shards that clinked whenever she moved her head, a sound Tam immediately wanted to own as a memory, a keepsake no one could steal because it wasn't theirs to take. Ria wore the look of someone who had once believed in a future that would be fair, and who had learned to live with a more complicated, more expensive truth. Her eyes tracked them with a strange mix of caution and relief. "You're Tam," Ria said to Tam's face, as if deducing something already visible to the world. And you are Nix's partner. I've seen you in a memory broadcast. Tam drew a breath, measured. The moment felt like a trap and a gift at the same time. In this city, memory brokers wore smiles that looked like masks and wore masks that looked like smiles. "Ria," Tam said, offering a handshake that wasn't quite a grip, just a seal of professional courtesy. "We're looking for a director who knows the Harvest's next move. They call it the archive." The word struck something in Ria. Her pupils widened slightly, and her mouth found a line that suggested both fear and hunger. "Archive is a rumor and a weapon," she told them, voice low enough that a passerby wouldn't catch it, but loud enough to carry to an ear that listened with too much care. "An archive that rewrites you when you keep a shard is not a rumor in the air, but a law of the air." Tam glanced at Nix, and Nix's glow deepened with a shade of violet. If the archive existed, Tam suspected it would be in the same way a rumor might become a law if enough people believed it. The archive would be the kind of thing that required someone to touch it to prove it real. But once you touched it, you could never quite be the same again. "Show us," Tam said simply. "Tell us about the archive." Ria hesitated, then drew Tam closer with a conspiratorial tilt of the head. She guided them into a private booth at the back of the cafe, where the ambient music sank to a whisper and the light glowed warmer, more intimate. "The archive isn't just one thing," Ria began. "It's a pervasive system, a distributed intelligence built into the city's memory networks. It's older than the Nova Consortium's current harvest. It predates the glass memory economy by years. People who touch the archive don't always know they've touched it, because the archive is not a person. It's a pattern of how memory can be stored, shared, and rewritten." Tam's fingers found the edge of the memory knife at their belt, just to remind themselves it was there. If this archive existed, it would be a threat to them as a thief, and to Nix as a ghost of data. It would also be a weapon that could change everything about how memories were owned, traded, and kept. "The archive rewrites you when you keep a shard," Ria whispered, glancing around the room as if memory could flow in through the walls. "If you take a shard and choose to keep it, a part of you begins to adopt the shard's origin story. Your memory becomes a mosaic of other stories and voices, and you begin to forget the original you that existed before you touched it." Tam frowned. They'd heard something like that in the market's whispers, but seeing it stated aloud gave it a weight of inevitability. The archive didn't care who you were. It cared who you would become once you accepted a shard. It cared about rewriting people in order to create a stable, controllable narrative. Nix's voice intruded with a hum of curious alarm. "If the archive rewrites you," it said, "then destroying it isn't the same as destroying a villain. It's more like destroying gravity. You might set it back to a state where people can walk upright again, but the ground beneath your feet would change." Nix paused, as if listening to an unspoken memory. "If we fuse with the archive, we could shield our friends. Perhaps even heal some who've already turned into something else entirely. But we'd be giving up a core and individuality built from countless choices." A flicker of something like fear passed through Nix's glow. Tam's mind word, the choice destruction or fusion, stood like a cliff at the edge of a memory plane. Tam could feel the weight of their own past decisions, pressing down, the times they had chosen to betray what they believed in for a price that would not crumble the city's delicate system of exchange. They had always looked for the clean solution, the way to cut the head from a hydra without losing the body that carried them. The archive wasn't a head, it was a hydra's nervous system. "Who controls the archive?" Tam asked. Ria shrugged. "That's the thing. It's not a single controller, it's an ecology, it's a structure of consent. It grows where memory is valued and where fear of forgetting is a currency people are willing to pay. The Nova Consortium wants to harvest shards to be systematized into a memory bank they can steer, a distributed mind they can turn to their own ends. They want to sell certainty to those who crave it, a map that promises to keep you from getting lost in your own life." Tam pressed their lips together. The idea of a company controlling the contents of millions of lives through memory shards made them feel hollow inside, as if a quiet space within their chest had just been shaved away. "What did you want to tell us, Ria?" Nix asked, the digital glow now a steady, patient light rather than a flicker. Ria took a breath that came out as a slow exhale. The archive isn't just about memory, it's about identity. Identity is a story you tell yourself, and the archive can become your most persuasive author. The worst case is when you forget you were the author at all. She looked at Tam, her eyes soft, almost hopeful. If you're chasing a thing called archive, you're chasing a story that has already decided you exist within it. You want to free yourself from a script you didn't write. You want to write your own line, even if it risks breaking the page. Tam felt the weight of those words in every nerve. In their line of work, their life had always been about controlling scripts, rewriting a memory to retrieve the truth, cutting away a painful recollection to keep a client safe, removing a smear of fear to give someone the courage to walk through a door they'd always avoided. The moment stretched on, and the world outside the booth pressed in, a memory notification chiming in the distance, the soft clink of glass vials, a dog barking a memory of a long-lost street. The air smelled of rain and something like camera flash, moments captured and then released into the ether. Tam stood, the chair scraping the floor. The movement a small public ritual that might reveal their intentions to the city. Nix's presence slowed to a cautious glow, as if pausing to hear the world's breath. "Where do we start?" Tam asked. The question had no easy answer. The archive was a mountain, the Nova Consortium was a gorilla in the valley below, and the memory market hummed like a city-sized machine that would not stop. Ria looked at Tam with a mix of worry and resolve. If you want a starting point, you go to the edges first, the places where memory is the loudest, where the price of a memory is highest, but the fear of losing it is even higher. The edge is where the harvest will gather its power, where the archive's gravity pulls in the most terrified minds. You need to disrupt that gravity, and you need to do it with a plan that doesn't require you to become what you're fighting. Tam nodded, not because they fully understood, but because the path was beginning to reveal itself through words. They would go to the edges, to the places where memory fear and memory wealth met in neon glare and stale blood and cold, efficient machines. They would find those loggers, those corporate hunters, those men and women who believed the price of memory should be measured in gold and not in the living, breathing person who had once owned that memory. The night closed in around them with a velvet hiss, the city's memory network sighing a little as the people who watched them watched back. The road ahead would be sharp and dangerous, but Tam had never been the kind of person who turned away from a cliff just because it looked dangerous. They were a thief, perhaps, but not a fool. They knew that what they did wasn't only about the money or the thrill. It was about keeping the thread of a self from slipping through their fingers, like a wet rope. That night, Tam and Nix left the cafe in the direction of the outskirts, toward the Memory Harvest farms, toward the public squares where shards lay thick on the air, toward places where memory was the primary currency and fear of forgetting was the only true law left standing. The following days carried Tam through a city that had learned to split itself into two realities, daylight's memory markets, and night's quiet, where memory glitters lay ignored on the ground while people pretended they were not there. Tam moved with a purpose they didn't always admit to themselves, to find a way to stop the archive's tyranny without becoming a tyrant themselves. They found clues in the oddest places. A vendor who kept a ledger of remembered meals, a nurse who could recall every patient's memory with surgical precision, a child who could tell a story about a life before memory made sense. Clues came in fragments. The name of a factory that reprocessed dream shards, an old warehouse where memory logs were stored in long shelves that reached to the ceiling, a rooftop where a group of rebels trained themselves to resist the archive's pull with rituals of memory clarity. The search drew them into alliances with people who believed in a different kind of future. A future where memories could be owned, yes, but not by those who would use them to erase others. A future where memory wealth did not equate with power over the person, where the self could be both plural and singular in a way that didn't demand the surrender of what made you you. In the second week of the hunt, Tam and Nix encountered a man named Calder, a former Logner who had turned to a life of quiet resistance after losing too many memories to the archive's hungry appetite. Calder spoke in a careful, barbed way, as if he'd learned that honesty could cost him a life, and that sometimes the truth had to be measured the same way you measure a memory, by its shelf life, by how long it would still be useful to you. Calder had a map of the Nova Consortium's layout, a rough diagram he'd carved into a memory stone, an artifact that could store more than just a memory. It could store a plan, a strategy, a blueprint. Calder's plan wasn't generous. It was pragmatic. It accepted that you could not defeat a system by brute force alone, but that you could disrupt its heartbeat by severing its supply lines, and by making the cost of harvesting memory unacceptably high. "Why help us?" Tam asked one night, as the three of them stood on Calder's rooftop. The city's distant hum, like a sleeping dragon beneath them. The wind carried a scent of rain and memory, someone's memory of a storm, of a kiss, of a morning when nothing was certain. Calder looked at Tam with a tired smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Because I still belong to something bigger than myself," he said, voice soft, almost a whisper. "Because I know what it feels like to lose yourself. And I'd rather walk through 1,000 burned cities than watch one person lose their self and call it progress." This was no heroic speech, no glittering manifesto. It was quiet and stubborn, and it spoke to something in Tam that they had learned to keep quiet. The stubborn belief that even a ruined world could be redeemed if enough people refused to sell it for a price they could feel in their own bodies later. The trio formed a fragile alliance, a mosaic of old rebels, pragmatic thieves, and a few insiders who still believed in a future where memory could belong to the person who owned it. They moved from one edge to another, a pattern of stealth and risk, a choreography that allowed them to siphon a little bit of the archive's hold and redirect it toward those who would resist. They didn't always win. They had close calls, the kind that left you with a memory of adrenaline you could go back to when you needed courage, the kind that could be saved for a later time when it mattered. One night, as they worked to decrypt a warehouse's shard registry, Nick spoke with a gravity that hadn't been present before. The ghost's voice took on a tone of serious deliberation, the kind Nick's rarely used when it spoke to Tam. "The archive's logic is not simply about control," Nick said. "It wants to be understood. It wants to be predicted. It wants to be engaged with in a way that feels like a conversation rather than a threat. If we want to destroy it, we must ensure that there is a world after it that doesn't hinge on the same fear that made it possible to exist in the first place." Tam considered this, their mind turning like a cog that refused to settle on a single gear. They thought of all the memories they'd used in their life, as weapons, as currency, as proof of worth. They thought of the people who had asked them to steal forever, the ones who had paid them to take a memory away and leave behind nothing but a sense of something missing. They thought of Rhea, of Calder, of the children who would one day become adults in a world defined by how many memories they could amass, how much they could invest in the self that belonged to them in the end. They found themselves standing at the edge of the Nova Consortium's main memory farm, the place where memory shards were harvested in a glow of cold electric blue, and the air was thick with a sweetness that reminded Tam of summer evenings spent listening to distant, tinny radio broadcasts. The farm's perimeter was lined with high fences, woven from memory threads and a security network that glowed with the pale color of frost. The plan grew in their minds as a single thread of possibility among a tangled skein. To seed the archive with a counter-meme, a pattern that could disrupt its rewriting function by interrupting the memory's identity metadata. It would be a dangerous, perhaps a suicidal thing to do. But it would also give them a chance to sever the archive's grip on the city and open a window of possibility for the many people who had no choice but to bow to the archive's power. The night before they would execute the plan, Tam lay on a rooftop overlooking the farm. The memory crystals drifted in slow, patient circles above the fences, catching the moonlight and releasing it in 1,000 tiny prisms. It was a beautiful, terrible sight, the kind of beauty that could make a person forget fear for a moment and then remember it in full force when the memory glass cut through the night with its cold edge. Tam's breath formed a mist in the air. a small reminder of their body, their own life. The archive's gravity pulled at their chest, the memory of a grandmother's face, perhaps, or a childhood friend's last goodbye. Or maybe it was just fear. They weren't sure anymore what memory belonged to the old life and what belonged to the new life they were building for themselves. A line between those two lives had become a rope, and Tam knew that only by stepping forward could they either tie themselves off or let the rope break. Nix hovered beside Tam in a glow that reflected the city's lights, the two of them almost a pair of stars, caught in a moment of memory. The ghost's voice came softly, not loud enough to wake the city's sleeping watchers, but enough to carry a warning to Tam's listening heart. "Be careful what you wish for," Nix said. "If you succeed, the city might become something else entirely. If you fail, you become something else entirely too. There's no safe outcome here." Tam turned to Nix and offered a pale, thin smile that didn't reach their eyes. "We're already something else," they said, and their voice sounded almost foreign to their own ears, as if those words didn't belong to this person, but to someone who had lived somewhere else, in someone else's memory. The next day began with a bright, cold light that belonged to a sky the color of bone. The Nova Consortium's farm stretched across a wide landscape, a labyrinth of storage and capture devices, a city within a city, all of it wired to the central hive mind that the archive had become. Tam and Nix, joined by Calder and a handful of rebels, slipped through the farm's perimeter with the ease of people who had practiced breaking into places they weren't supposed to be. They moved through the wire like fish in a stream, silent as breath, careful as surgeons. The plan was straightforward in its brutality. Plant a counter-program at the heart of the archive system within the data conduit that connected the memory shipments to the city's memory market, and watch the architecture of the archive collapse in on itself. It would cause the archive to misread everywhere, to misinterpret the ownership of every shard, to misconnect the memory story to anyone who claimed it as their own. For a time, the city would be free of the old perfected system. For a time, people could choose again what to keep and what to let go. But there was a second, more dangerous part of the plan. Tam would need to touch a shard themselves, something they had avoided for a long time, because of a memory they didn't want to touch again. The memory of losing their sister to the city's memory market years ago. A memory that had haunted Tam like a ghost who'd learned to breathe with their breath. The moment of truth came when they stood in the archive's central data hall, the core of the entire plant, a room lit by the cold blue of memory neutrinos, where shards floated in suspended animation like trapped fireflies. The air smelled of iron and sweet synth sap, a scent that said this was a place where futures could be bought and sold and bent to anyone's will. Tam prepared to place themselves into the heart of the machine, to become the instrument of the archive's vulnerability in a way that would demand a price in their own identity. Nix warned them in a voice that vibrated with static, but it was a voice of caution, not of fear. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Nix asked. "If you hold a shard while the counter-memory takes place, you might become something else entirely. That memory will rewrite you as surely as any other you've kept." Tam looked at Calder, who stood a few steps away with his coat collar turned up against the cold and a stubborn, hopeful fire in his eyes. Calder nodded once, a small gesture that meant both trust and a dare to fate. Then Tam turned toward the heart of the data hall, toward the shimmering shard that hovered in the center, an object that was the archive's own version of a heart, the piece that maintained the system's rhythm. The shard was a perfect, tear-shaped crystal that glowed with a faint interior light, a light of memory that could illuminate 1,000 pasts and 100 possible futures. Tam slipped their fingers around it and felt a rush, a memory tide brushing over their skin, the sensation of being caught between a dozen voices, each one asking them to keep their own memory and become something else, something bigger than themselves, something that could endure beyond one body. And then the archive began to respond. It wasn't a scream or a shout, It was a quiet, patient rain of information that pressed into Tam's mind from every direction. It whispered to them in a language of thought and sensation, in the voice of every memory it contained, and with every whisper it offered them the choice. Stay with yourself, destroy the archive, and lose this one moment in which you could alter everything. Or join with us, fuse with the archive's fabric, become part of the greater mind, and preserve a world of friends and family by giving up the singular, stubbornly human thing that kept you from becoming a tool of the powerful. Tam's breath came hard, fast, and then even. The world grew quiet in a way that felt almost holy, as if the room itself paused to listen to the heart inside Tam's chest, inside every chest, a memory, a map, a story, and a voice that would answer. They could feel Nyx's presence near them, a glow that burned with a careful intensity. In that moment, they made their choice. They did not choose to destroy the archive outright. They chose to sever the archive's gravity by a different means, to force the archive to question its own logic, to acknowledge the price of its own existence, to reveal to the city that a future built on memory could still be negotiated, that the self could be preserved not by total independence, but by shared responsibility, by a new kind of consent that didn't pretend to erase individuality, but allowed it to be expressed within a network that cared for each other. Tam's body tensed as if a line of code was being rewritten inside them, a line that would alter who they were. The shard's memory poured into Tam, yes, but what the archive did in response was to offer them something else, an opportunity to shape a new memory, a new future, one that recognized the integrity of the self while acknowledging the need for a shared survival in a world that had become impossible to live in alone. Nyx, seeing what Tam intended to do, poured a field of controlled gravity around them to slow the archive's reach. To protect Tam as the two of them performed the counter-move, Calder's hands were steady at their side, guiding Tam's movements, ensuring they didn't mishandle a shard or let a memory fall away entirely. The counterplan succeeded in a sense. The archive didn't collapse. It shifted. The city's memory grid didn't become a blank page, it became a volatile, living map that could be renegotiated. Instead of the archive rewriting everyone's story into a single, uniform script, it began to distribute the power more evenly, a democratic memory mechanism that allowed people to retain their sense of self while still enjoying the collective benefit of a shared memory world. The harvest farm fell into a stillness that felt almost reverent, the hum of machines lowering to a patient murmur. The air cleared a little, the memory's oppressive gravity lifting in a wave that rolled through the city like a sigh of relief. The people who had become vessels of memory drifted a little less, now less sure that a shard would decide who they were. In the days that followed, the city started to change in small, almost imperceptible ways. There were fewer of the old, reckless disputes about who had the right to memory and who deserved to keep their own. People still traded shards, the memory market remained a potent force, but the rules had shifted. The archive's new shape allowed for safeguards, consent protocols, revocation options, and limits on the manner in which a memory shard could redefine a person's identity. It was not perfect, but it was enough to stabilize the city's living memory and give individuals a fighting chance at controlling their own narratives. Tam's life changed in more intimate ways, too. The moment of their decision had altered something inside them. Not erased, not replaced, but reframed. They found themselves more capable of listening to others' memories without becoming overwhelmed by them. The voice in their head that had often told them to act, to seize, to steal, whispered less loudly now, or spoke with a more cautious counsel. They realized that the self, even when shared, could still be a center of gravity, a person whose choices mattered, even when they were part of a larger whole. Rhea reappeared not as a buyer or a seller, but as a participant in the new balance. She'd become something of a courier for the archive and its new rules, a person who could translate the memories into actions that benefited the city's vulnerable. She wore a small smile now, not because she had won a victory, but because she had found a way to ensure that the memory market would serve the people, instead of merely enriching the powerful. Calder, too, changed. He became not only a hacker and an organizer, but a guardian of memory sovereignty for the city's neighborhoods, places where memories were most vulnerable to capture and exploitation. He helped set up memory sanctuaries, protected zones where individuals could undergo memory-cleansing rituals if they found themselves overwhelmed by a shard's influence, or where they could revoke a memory's ownership if it began to distort their sense of self. The world around them moved, as all worlds do, toward a new equilibrium that didn't feel perfect, but felt possible. The sky, at sunset again, still glowed with a coppery light. But this time, the air didn't burn with the fear of losing oneself to a larger machine. It carried instead a cautious optimism, a belief that humanity might hold on to its memory, its past, its present, and its future, without sacrificing the right to decide what they wanted to be. The journals of the city began to fill with a new language of memory ethics, a vocabulary for consent, for revocation, for shared memory without shared loss of individuality. There were debates and disagreements, heated nights, where the city's citizens argued over how much of themselves they should give to a memory economy that promised security but demanded surrender. Some argued that a mind's integrity was inviolable. Others claimed that memory, in its most powerful forms, was a tool that could shape a better world if used carefully. The dialogues grew into movements that slowly redefined what it meant to be an individual and what it could mean to be a community. Tam kept walking the city's memory-lit streets, a quiet sense of responsibility resting on their shoulders like a cloak. The archive's presence persisted, not as a coercive force, but as a living system that could be coaxed toward a more ethical operation. It was, in a way, a partner in the struggle for freedom, an unpredictable partner, perhaps, one that might betray them tomorrow, or one that could be coaxed into kindness by the stubborn persistence of the city's new norms. The memory ripple, this last line in the brief that had started everything, still moved through the city in occasional, stuttering waves. People who felt the ripple would stop, take a breath, and consider whether they would keep a shard or let it go. The ripple wasn't a siren. It was a whisper that reminded you of your choice, to remain a self or to become part of something larger, for better or worse. In the months that followed, Tam found themselves reflecting on what it meant to own a memory, and what it meant to own oneself. They found themselves standing, sometimes quite literally, at the edge of a memory shore, watching the tide roll in and out, listening to the way the shoreline of their own life shifted as new memories rolled in and old ones drifted away. But there was a line that could not be crossed, the line where a memory might erase the person who had lived it. The archive's new guardrails prevented that worst-case scenario, and the city's social contract grew stronger as a result. People began to tell the most intimate stories with care, knowing that a memory was both a gift and a responsibility, something you could give to another person, and something you could take back if it started to distort who you were. There remained enemies cohorts of Nova Consortium executives who insisted that the market be left to its old rules, who argued that the memory economy's power should be centralized and controlled, who believed that personal sovereignty was a fragile relic of a past era. These people, Tam recognized, would be the story's future antagonists, the ones who would test the new balance by pushing the boundaries of what the archive could do and what the city could tolerate. Tam's own life continued to be a story that was being written by the world around them, a story that wasn't complete, but was becoming more interesting with each passing day. They retained the memory of the choice they had made at the archive's heart. And with that memory came courage, the courage to defend a world in which people could remember without losing themselves. And in a city now full of memory, Tam learned to listen to the spaces between memories as carefully as to the memories themselves. They learned that the story of who you are is not a single line on a page, but a chorus of voices that you carry with you, sometimes as your own, sometimes as another's, always as something you must decide how to live with. The sun set again, with a gentle, coppery glow that spread across the rooftops and turned the glass into a field of living fireflies. A sea of memory that sometimes brightened and sometimes dimmed, as the people beneath it remembered or forgot. The air filled with that familiar, beautiful ache, the ache of what you could have been, what you might become, and what you chose to keep or relinquish. If you listened close enough, you could hear the memory of laughter from a street corner where a child once played with a shard-carrying grandmother. You could hear the sigh of a memory that had belonged to someone who had learned to trust again. You could hear the promise that, even in the face of the archive's temptations, the city had found, at last, a way to hold on to itself, while still allowing itself to grow. Tam paused, letting the moment fill them. Day's last light stretched across the city's memory glass and settled into Tam's eyes as a calm certainty. They had chosen a path that would not only save the people they cared about, but would also keep the self alive. A stubborn, bright flame that memory could not extinguish entirely. And the city's memory drifted peacefully around them, glittering in the air like a field of small suns. Not a threat, but a chorus. Not a weapon, but a promise. The chorus grew louder, as if the city itself was singing a line of a new song. A line about responsibility, about consent, about a future in which a memory could be shared without losing the self who remembered how to live. The night settled, soft as velvet, and the city slept with its memory dreams in gentle, careful circles. If this memory ripple hit you, subscribe, like, comment, and share for more. The end. Support. Ad powered by free text APIs. Support our mission to keep AI accessible.